Hello, I'm Dr. Jane McCartney. I'm a psychologist in the UK and I'm fascinated by human behaviour and all things crime. In this episode, I wanted to look at the tragic events of the 8th of December last year when Oreanna Myers killed not only herself but her 3 own children and her 2 stepchildren. And I wanted particularly to look at potentially what was going through her head at the times of the planning of the killings, because there was a lot of premeditation involved, but also the actual killings themselves. So she was a young mum. She had the care of 5 young boys aged from 1 to 7. There was Sean 7, Riley 6, Kian 4, Arikyle 3 and Haken 1. Now, the younger 3 were her own biological children and the 2 older ones were her stepchildren, but seemingly the care between them and Brian, Oreanna's husband, and their natural mother was split 50-50, so she was looking after them. And it would seem that there'd been a lot going on in her life. There'd been a crash seemingly with the family car or something, which had resulted in difficulties with Brian, her husband, being able to get to work, which then meant that instead of being at the house all the time or coming and going every day, he would be staying with relatives where he was working, leaving her with the sole care of these 5 young boys. And in the notes that she would leave, she would talk about not being able to resist her demons. That was one thing that came out. But also there was kind of an element of castigation and annoyance at other people. And I'm going to come on to the characterisation of what type of killer she potentially was a little bit later. But this is described as Annihilator, a family annihilator. Very, very rare with women. More so, you see this with men, where they will just take out the whole family, including themselves, often as an act of revenge for something. Usually it's something to do with finances. That's very high on the cards. But in Oreanna's case, it was she would be what you would describe as a disappointed killer. She was disappointed with her husband. She was disappointed with her wider social circle. She was disappointed with her family. Anybody. She was disappointed in them in not seeing the situation that she was in, which was struggling emotionally, struggling financially, struggling, with her cognitive thoughts about what was going on in her life. And she also wouldn't have seen an end to it. So you have the situation where she would have planned this killing, and it could have been planned days, weeks, months before. But once she had set herself on that course of, I'm going to take the lives of you 5 children, and I'm also going to take the life of myself because I know I shouldn't be doing this. And if I was to live, then there would be repercussions for it. So that's why killers in mass shootings will often take their own lives, because they know that there will be repercussions for it. So she would have planned this, and apparently the weapon that she used would have taken reloading, and each time that she shot one of the children, and she shot them in a way that they weren't going to live, all of them. And it must have just been, for those poor young boys, it just must have been absolutely terrifying. But for her thoughts at those times, her thoughts at the planning of it, right, I'm going to show the world how you've let me down. I'm going to show the world what I'm capable of. And the writing of the notes, she would write about how she was unable to resist her demons and how mental health was really important. And please let this be a message put out there for the rest of the world to take notice of when people are struggling. And her thoughts about that would have been, I'm on my own. I don't see any other way to get the world to take notice of me. And there must have been other ways. Of course, there must have been other agencies, friends, social services, or what the American version of social services would have been. The police, there would have been something that she could have reached out to, but she chose not to. She chose to make the statement of how her mind was acting at that time. The fact that she wrote 3 quite explicit and detailed notes as well, again, suggests a huge amount of premeditation going on in her head. When these events actually happen, though they are planned, it might not be the actual, right, I'm going to plan it, I'm going to do it on the 8th of December like she did. It may have been, right, I've got an idea of this is what I'm going to do. I've got my shotgun, I've got the cartridges, I know what I'm going to do. But it may have just been something that tipped her over to make it that date. It could have been in January, it could have been in April, but there was something that just tipped her over, and it also could have been earlier for her. But on the 8th of December, there could have been something. And it was coming up to Christmas, it was coming up to the holidays, so perhaps there was discussions about where the children were going to go, who were they going to spend Christmas with, what was going to be bought for them present-wise. So it seems it was a very stressful time to her. And the other thing that she describes and talks about is a numbness, which I quite find very interesting. And often when people talk about a numb or a not being able to feel emotion, so she wouldn't have been able to feel the emotion, the empathy, the sympathy of what it would have been like for those children, obviously, and potentially what it would have been like for her husband, Brian, though she did send him a text saying, oh, when you come home, there'll be something for you. So again, she's making that statement. She's got the cognitive wherewithal to be able to make a statement about what was going on in her head. So that numbness is often born out of when people are traumatized. Now, I don't know anything about her background. I can't really find much about her background. So there's often a trauma attached to that blunt feeling, that not being able to feel things. And I thought it was quite interesting that that's how she described her heart, a numbness of her heart. So those are just some of the thoughts about Oreanna Myers and her family annihilation. It was interesting as well, just to add on, it was interesting that she killed the boys in the household and she set fire to the house. And again, that is very indicative and very suggestive of somebody that is wanting to cover evidence. So there's potentially a guilt attached to what I've done. I've done this terrible, awful thing. She described it in her notes as being an evil thing. I've done this terrible and awful thing. But rather than somebody come in and find the bodies of these poor dead boys in the state that I've left them, I'm going to set fire to the house as well to destroy all of that evidence, or to make it even harder for people to understand or see what had gone on. So there's an element of guilt attached to that as well. And the fact that she took herself out, so she killed the boys and set fire to the house, and then she took herself out and killed herself in a car, which is very interesting because she's making that separation between them as being one thing that she's done and the thing that she did to herself as being a completely separate other thing. But she was quite determined that the notes that were found, they were put in a plastic bag and taped to windows or to the car mirror or something, so they would be found. She was under no doubts whatsoever of her thoughts and her actions, and to her justification being found by the authorities, being found by her husband. So they knew exactly what her thoughts would have been at that time. And her thoughts would have been desperation, annoyance, irritation. But as this categorization says, disappointed. She was disappointed that people just didn't take any notice of her situation and do something to change it. Whether she reached out to people, I don't know. And remember, this is just me, based on years of experience, just speculating as to what she may have been thinking at that time. So those are my thoughts on Oreanna Myers. If I could ask you to please like and subscribe, that would be really great. Thanks ever so much. And I'll be along with another video shortly. Thanks then.